Angela Jordaan, I am very happy to finally have you in our Secret Cellar studio. It's been a while. We tried this during COVID. We had a very unsuccessful attempt over Zoom. But yeah, I think why I'm so excited to chat to you is, we've been talking to women in wine, and I think the traditional rock star of the wine industry is that the winemaker, and the winemaker gets so much of the glory, rightly so, because winemakers in South Africa have such a connection to their vineyards and obviously the winemaking process, and we look outside of South Africa for inspiration and learning. So most winemakers travel and work in France or America or down under. But you are the person who's been responsible for shaping many of the brands that we've worked with, for driving sales and marketing in a property. Without you, no one can make wine. Am I right?
Well, you can always make wine, but you're going to struggle to sell wine. So I think it takes a very special, you can say, winemaker to be able to produce the product and to sell the product, because many, I find winemakers are very involved in what they do, and that's farming, which takes up a huge amount of your time. They're very happy to be on their properties and in their vineyards, and I think at the end of the day, you've got to meet a person and you've got to create a relationship, and then you've got to nurture that relationship, and then you've got to do a sale.
So you have to ask for the sale.
There we go. And I just know that I've been very blessed in my career in being given many chances. I've a person that learns from the practical, not necessarily the theory. And I think I've really just put my heart and soul into everything, and people have identified that in me, and winemakers have spent a lot of time with me in the cellars, tasting through the tanks, tasting through barrels. And from that, I've managed to grow. I find that every day you have new relationships that you make. And so it is something which is, almost starting from scratch at the beginning of every month. That's how it is with sales, So,
well, I don't know if it is with you, because someone who's passionate, which you are, and our team really loves working with you because of that passion and energy. But someone who works in wine on the sales and marketing front, I mean, it's all about building long-term relationships and long-term relationships that last, obviously within a brand, but then potentially as you move through we'll talk about your 5-year plans, like Stalin. But as they move into different positions, different brands, then those relationships continue. So a lot of what you've done it's not about every week's a new week. You pick up every week where you've left off in terms of these relationships and connections you've built. Is that what you find? I mean, is it like it's not just going out and every week trying to sell. It's building a brand and building ongoing connections.
Yeah, so I think what I have instilled in me is loyalty.
Yeah.
And so you're born with that. I think you don't just develop that. And for me, I have found through my career that every step that I have taken is that I have definitely learned to never burn a bridge, because without those opportunities in my life, I would not be sitting here having this discussion with you today. So yes, it is definitely about maintaining those relationships, and you want to grow a brand. So even now where I am working at Kaapzicht Wines, it's very much when you choose the importers on the export market that you need to make sure that the people that you choose to work with are not only fitted for myself, they're actually fitted to the family. It is something that I've also been very blessed with. I've never worked for a big corporate. I've always managed to work within the realm of family business, which has been quite amazing. And, for that, you need to make sure that family is going to see longevity with the people that we choose to work with and that choose to work with us. I always believe that a relationship needs to be mutually beneficial. It doesn't help that you have somebody who lists your wine somewhere and they don't believe in your product and they don't move a bottle.
Yeah.
So you've got to be prepared to get into the marketplace to support the people that are buying your wines, and they are also pounding the pavements on that side, and to go and visit them and encourage them and tell them the story and to work with them. And you only get one chance to make a first impression. But when you've made that first impression, it's a lot easier then to maintain that relationship. You don't want that first impression to be a bad one. Yeah, so I always think that, when you are pounding the pavements, it does usually end up being reasonably late nights and early mornings.
Yes.
But I think it's the energy that you pick up when you are traveling, whether it be here in the local market or in the export market. It makes you want to get up and go and do it again the whole next day. So, in kind of when I say you starting from scratch, there are so many people that have, kind of closed businesses and open businesses, and especially, in this whole COVID era. And it has been quite amazing to see how many of those existing customers have actually come through it. And that's the people that are that believe in what they do, and they do everything with their heart. It's not just kind of a fly-by-night, let's open it, let's be cool and have lots of people there and be known as the owner of this place. Those ones didn't make it. But the guys who use it as a livelihood, and they have their heart and their soul and their passion goes into their business, they've all made it, which is great. And those are the relationships that I tend to really put a lot of time into and to maintain, because we're all in it for the same reason, and that's to sell a luxury product at a luxury place to consumers who, when they decide to actually let their hair down after a really hectic day's work, or go on a holiday to a lodge, for example, you want them to choose your bottle of wine, and they should be able to taste the hard-earned work and passion and everything from the vineyard into that glass, and that should then make your kind of either day or holiday complete. So it's a fun job. I can't imagine I would have done anything else.
What did you do before?
Oh my goodness. So I'm actually a qualified auctioneer, funnily
No
enough.
ways. Really?
Yeah, I am, but I haven't done that for a very long time. And when I just left school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. So at that time, we could still get our 2-year work visas for the UK. So kind of packed my bag, went over to the UK, worked as a chambermaid, worked as a makeup artist at Chanel. Then I came back and I was like, oh, what am I going to do? So I went and did a makeup course, and then I did an auctioneering course, and then I ended up going back to the UK. And then when I came back again, I still didn't know what I wanted to do. And I went to a hen's party 2 days after I arrived back. And I met a girl who to this day is still one of my best friends. And she said, oh, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know. I haven't gone to varsity. I haven't studied. I feel like I'm a little bit lost. And this was when I was 25.
Wow.
And she said, well, I've got my sister company that's looking for sales reps, and, that's in the wine industry. And I was like, yeah, sure. That sounds like fun. So I went to her house the next week, got her Cape Wine Academy introduction books, read through them. I still remember sitting with my sisters, pouring wine and swirling it and going, oh, you've got to look at the colour and apparently the nose. And ended up going the next day for my interview a little bit tainted, a little bit of a headache. But I did manage
Pushing hard for that first impression.
But I think I did get through to the second round, and then I did end up getting offered the job of a sales representative for a distribution company in Pretoria. And through that, I obviously got to meet the winemakers of the properties that I represented. I got to pound the pavements. I got to understand what the whole sales thing is. I got to learn so much about wine because I definitely find that knowledge is power. And when you are selling a product, you need to understand it. You need to be able to talk about it confidently, because when people ask you a question about something that you're selling, it's because they're eager to learn. So you must always be able to understand your product well. And about 3.5 years later, I was like, I have to get to the Western Cape because it's beautiful. And I managed to do so. So I came down to the Western Cape, and then I managed to work for a property for a year, which I find was my kind of ticket down, and then I moved to the second property where I was for 4.5 years, to Radfordale Wines. I was there as their sales manager for 2 years, and then was promoted to the export manager and national sales manager, and I did that. That was really my opportunity to, and I'll always be very thankful to Alex Dale, who owns it, for that opportunity. It allowed me to get overseas, to understand the international market. And when I got to the international market, then your mind is just blown, because you think you know a lot about wine when you're in South Africa, but there's actually a whole world of wine being produced out there. So it's really from farming to styles of wine to, I think we're going to touch on it a bit later, about, the orange wine. You can see the wine in the glass.
A glass of Barocca here.
Yeah. And then I had that opportunity. And then I moved after 4.5 years to a company called Bosman Family Vineyards. And I'll always say, I think that Bosman Family Vineyards was my varsity. So I was there for 5.5 years. They've got quite an incredible setup, because they're not only farmers, but they're also, they grow vines. So they're a vine nursery. So I learned a lot about propagation and about plant improvements. And I used to spend hours and hours with Marietta Lowe, who was in charge of that, just kind of geeking out with her, and always in the nursery and looking at the grafts. And I think I managed to take a brand which was reasonably new but not very well known in regards to the name, and spend 5.5 years really putting a lot of energy into that, and I think assisting really well to put them on the map. And then it also got to a point where I thought, I think that I've added a lot of value here, but I feel that there's somewhere else which needs me more. And so I then moved after 5.5 years of being to Bosman to my current position at Kaapzicht Wines. So they're a 4th generation family-owned business, and I've known Donnie Jr. and his wife Karen for 12 years, so since I moved down to the Western Cape. And I said to him, doesn't your mom want to retire at some point? And they're like, yeah, funnily enough, they're retiring at the end of the year. And so took a few months of discussion, and then I moved in to fulfill her position. So I then managed the local and international sales for them. The whole brand has been rebranded. We've refined the portfolio. Stylistically, the wines are slowly evolving again. And I'm very, like I said, fortunate and blessed to have had the journey that I have. And as you mentioned earlier, is that I still speak to every single one that I've worked with often. We've got a very big respect for each other, as I respect them giving me the opportunity to grow myself. They respect how I've assisted in the building of their
And I think there's so many little pearls in there. I think, the interesting one for me is whenever we start something. My wife did a presentation on this for the hospital, where there's something called the Kruger-Dunning effect, which is basically confidence on the one axis and then competence on the other. And we start off with very little competence, but quite a lot of confidence, because you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then you start to go down the curve. As you get more experience, you almost become less confident, because you realize how much you don't know, which is kind of like when you arrive at Radfordale, and it's not just my 10 wines, but suddenly there's, you import Burgundy and Bordeaux, or not so much Bordeaux at that point. And
what are those wines?
Exactly. And then you start to build yourself up the curve again, where you build your confidence and your competence. And so that's the one thing. It's not an overnight journey, So for anyone, and we talk a lot in this podcast to our community of waiters and somms in Africa, and many of whom, as the industries shift, will start to move into trade, right? So that's what happens. You go from pounding the restaurant floor to pounding those streets, and it's like continuous learning is key. I think your focus on relationships is absolutely brilliant. And never burning a bridge, because the industry is small.
Very important.
And then one of the sort of big lessons that I learned, which I'm sure you'll agree with, is you can know everything there is about wine, but one of the key graduation ceremonies is understanding the brands and the stories behind them, because otherwise, your customers and your guests aren't necessarily interested in what a Sauvignon Blanc tastes like, but potentially the story of what you are bringing forward and why that might be interesting for their guest profile, to their waiters, whatever it might be. And so where did you take the jump from a sales focus into a little bit more on the sort of brand building, marketing? Because you've had a huge, wherever you've been now, there's also been a shift in the positioning of the brand. Suddenly there's maybe fewer lines of wines or new ones that might be relevant. When did that? Because you have to earn the stripes to be able to have that conversation with an owner of a family brand.
I think what I have managed to do well, and you're going to laugh at me now, is manage up. I think you don't only have to manage your teams below you, but you also need to manage your employers. And, I always think that it was never me saying, I think you should do this and I think you should do this. It was tasting a lot and actually questions. teaching them about other brands overseas and how they do it and what they've done and what have their journeys been.
Synthesizing from the markets. You out there, you're listening, you're seeing what's working, what's not working.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, if I had to refer more to kind of Bosman's side, is that they never necessarily wanted to be the face of their own brand, So I used to travel quite extensively for both Radfordale and as well, now that the world's opened up again, it's starting with Kaapzicht. But, I think for that, it was very much sitting around a table. I mean, I remember orchestrating a tasting of 11 orange wines, which I sourced from overseas and flew over. And say to them, if you want to produce a skin contact or orange wine in your portfolio, then you've got to understand what you're up against, and I feel by doing that, it just really inspired the winemakers. They, on their own accord, started adjusting how they were making the wines. It's the same when you had to look at Kaapzicht again, is that we taste a lot of wines together. So Kaylee Hatting joined Dani Jr. in the wine cellar as assistant winemaker in 2018, and that immediately after brings in a slight finesse. She works slightly gentler with the wines, and I think you have to have a story to tell. You can't be everything to everyone, and when you are the person that's kind of going to the UK or kind of sending that first email pitch to someone, I need to understand what I'm selling and I need to be able to communicate that to the customer, because if I can't communicate our story, who's going to want to buy it? And I think that is definitely, when you explain it like that and you sit around a table and you talk about it, you actually then develop the reason why your portfolio is like this. So it's never about walking into a place and going, I know what I'm doing and this is my past experience and we're going to get rid of this and change this and do that. It's about a discussion. And it's about what is the best way to grow your company so that you can hand it over to your children one day. Because that, at the end of the day, is the most important. Kaapzicht is the 4th generation. They need to have a healthy company to hand over to the 5th generation. And so I think when you kind of do sit around having a glass of wine or discussing different producers around the world, and you sell that vision to them, and then they understand, and that is how you manage to mold the portfolio into something which is a little bit clearer and something that you can sell.
Yeah. And well done. I think that's the sort of enduring impression that I and our team at Under the Influence have of you, is that you are very empathetic, very energetic, very passionate. You've built a lot of knowledge, you live your brand, but then you're not scared to ask the questions and to sort of gently but firmly shape the conversations, because that's what it is, right? I mean, if every brand had that communication and understanding of what's happening in the market and these conversations around benchmarking and what consumers are looking for, and that could synthesize into the portfolio and help to focus and tweak and it must be especially tough sometimes with family businesses because, you know, I mean, I think it's great timing at Kaapzicht for you because there's this sort of passing of the baton, which must be really exciting.
Yeah.
Because you definitely don't want to ever, as a family business, say, you know, well, what's been done is, you know, not great, so we're going to go in a different direction because that's never the case. It's always standing on the shoulders of giants. You know?
Yeah. So I think where I've been very fortunate with kind of joining Kaapzicht. So the handing over of the baton happened on the 1st of February this year.
Really?
So from father to son. And so...
Was there a ceremony or a bride? It must have been a bride.
Yeah, there's always a bride. No matter what you do, you come to Kaapzicht, there's a bride.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think when you had to look at, again, what you want to do is hand over a successful business. And, you know, in this day and age, it is very sad that many of the wineries in South Africa are actually generational wineries, aren't doing very well.
Yeah.
You know, so you've always got to try and protect that. And I think when Donnie Senior handed over to Donnie Junior, you know, Karen and Donnie had already been working within the brand for quite a while, and I think they'd already seen where they can do their tweaks and what they can do. And so what's quite nice is, you know, I'm 40, Karen's 41, Donnie's 42. We're all mates. We can all chat nicely together, and it was very much their vision of, I think, sitting and drinking many bottles of wine over a good few years, where they actually looked at the portfolio, refined it, and I came in at a time to help to execute it.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so I think that is wonderful. Yeah, I'm very, very blessed to be there, I must say. This one for me is more of a long-term position. Where I think at my previous job at Bosman, for some bizarre reason, when I signed with Petrus, I said to him, I'm only going to be here for 5 years. Don't know why.
Yeah, he had a huge impact there in that 5 years.
Yeah, so it was amazing. You know, I walked away from there with my head held very high and with very, very close relationships. Yeah.
Fantastic, Ange. Okay, right, Ange, let's get down to business. We've actually been, a little bit neglectful of this beautiful golden nectar. And what I wanted to talk to you about your career, and that's extremely exciting what you've achieved. It's just the beginning. It's a long way to go. But I also, part of your career you mentioned was passion. And, you know, what I love about you, one of the many things, is that you are passionate about other people's success, other people's projects. You've got a lot of general interests in the wine industry, and that comes through. And I think that helps and feeds your sort of day job, which is the sales and marketing. And one of your passions, which I've yet to really get and wrap my head around.
It's an obsession. It's not
an obsession. Exactly. And you fed me some of this during COVID, and maybe I couldn't taste because of having COVID 3 or 4 times. Orange wine. Talk to me about this enigma, because I don't quite get it. For me, it's I like freshness in wine. I'm kind of trying to avoid oxidized wine. You can hit me back.
Yeah. So you can say orange wine. I was introduced to orange wine when I was on a work trip in the UK. And working with one of our sales representatives, he took me to this most amazing restaurant and wine bar. And he got me a glass of orange wine and he said, here you go. And I drank it and I was like, this isn't wine, this is like juice. And he was like, exactly, just drink it. And then it got me thinking, and I'm like, but now what is this and how's it made? And in fact, skin contact or skin macerated, or what was dubbed then in 2004 as orange wine by a wine journalist in the UK, is not a new way of making wine. It's actually the first way that wine was made. And so they have actually found traces 6,000 BC in China, actually, of clay vessels under the ground with some remnants of what was grapes in there. But it's Georgia that's actually put the flag in the ground and said, we did it.
Yeah.
So basically back in the day, from my research and everyone that I've spoken to, is they would harvest the grapes because it's a fruit, and then they would put them into a clay pot, which is buried under the ground because that's a natural temperature control. And they would then put the fruit into these clay vessels, which is called quarvi, and then they would seal it.
Done.
And then a year later, when there was a drought, they could actually still drink their calories.
Okay.
And so orange wine is actually how white wine was made for many, many, many years. And it's only when the trade of wine happened, so when the whole spice route began, India to the UK, and we were the halfway mark, that it's the royals that started going, but I don't want to drink wine which is yellow, it must be clear.
Really?
And so, yeah. And so that is when they realized if you press the wine out of the grapes, as you do with red and white, then you put the white wine and you take it off the skins and then you ferment it in a tank. But with red wine, we want that color. So we'll take the juice into a tank and then we put the skins on top.
Got you.
So orange wine is basically making a white wine like you make a red wine.
Got you.
And what it does there is it actually extracts, again, the tannin and the structure from the skins.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily work on every varietal. I find that orange wines actually work the best on aromatic varietals.
Yeah.
So Chenin, which is what we're drinking here, Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Gris. I mean, I drank a Spanish wine the other day, a skin contact wine, and the grape variety was Zebolo. So, I mean, there's so many varieties all over the world that we don't actually even know all of them. But I just find, for me, when there is a wine that is produced well, that orange wine is the truest reflection of that grape variety. Because when you're using skin contact, you don't need to use sulfur.
Yeah.
And remember, even if you put a little drop of sulfur into a wine, you can immediately see the color change.
Yeah.
You can see the personality changes, you know.
Is that because the skin has natural sulfur levels, or is it like a preservative?
So the biggest thing is that with orange wine, remember with any vineyards, and that is why I'm also a very big supporter of people to farm, you know, more organically or biodynamically, or, you know, because when you have a very healthy yeast population on your grapes, then you don't need to buy yeast. Yeah. Then there's a natural fermentation that occurs, and that fermentation is a healthy fermentation because your grapes are healthy, and the yeast population is big enough to be able to carry it through. And, you know, happy plant, happy seller, happy wine, happy customer.
It's really interesting. And what is the original grape variety that they did this with in Georgia?
No, goodness. You know, they have got varieties that I cannot even pronounce.
Yeah, that's true. And they've got hundreds of them.
Yeah, they do. There's a vineyard there. Basically, the gentleman, John Verdeman, he is a Californian who is a winemaker who married a lady from Georgia. And so he is basically the only person that can speak English out of all the Georgian producers. So he is the one that's really...
the marketing guy.
So he actually is. So he's actually been out to South Africa to the Swartland Heritage Festival. He was one of the talkers. I've met him a good few times overseas. And they have what you call a vine garden with 143 different varieties that basically he makes a wine from. And it's called
like
a field blend. So I harvested all, but for me, to be honest, I can't pronounce them.
No, don't stress.
So sorry about that.
No, don't stress. It's just interesting because that's like sort of heritage within heritage to find those.
But it's so nice to see that, you know, so South Africans were very blocked off, I think, to it. Because trust me, when you have to farm organically, it's a lot more labor intensive, which often ends up being more expensive.
Yeah.
And the only thing that you're allowed to basically spray in your vineyards is going to be copper sulfate. Yeah. And you don't, you know, you can't go through with a machine and spray your weed killer and, you know, and so I am, however, seeing that with the movement that has happened overseas, you know, so in France, about 90% of the producers are now all farming organically. And I can see now that this is trend is starting to really kick off in South Africa, which is great. And you really do see a difference. So if you, for example, look at Avondale, so Avondale, Courtenay, and them actually went to Georgia, ordered Quadvi, and they, in Georgia, had them shipped over, and they are making wines in Quadvi. And it is quite incredible when you taste these wines made in those vessels, whether it be, clay or amphora.
And this was clay.
So you can taste like it's the purity of the product, So where I find when you're putting wine into brand new barrels, it's going to extract flavor, And so you can't necessarily then say to someone, taste my terroir, but all I'm tasting is 20 months of brand new French oak barrels, So for me, when I met the sales team called Le Cave de Perrine, actually in the UK, they are the ones that really got me sucked into natural wine. And I find that when you get into that and you can taste that purity of wine, it's not always maybe necessarily commercially viable for everyone to do it, but you taste electricity in the wine. You taste the wine is alive. You can almost taste that the wine has soul. And I often find it quite difficult when I come back after traveling in Europe, because that's all that I will drink is these naturally made wines, which can have a bad connotation, to be honest, because there are many people that wanted to use it as like a marketing trend because it got very big. But the natural wine is not an excuse for a badly made wine.
Got you.
So your wine shouldn't have Brett, and they shouldn't be unbalanced, and they shouldn't be fizzy. And you've got to remember that if you want to make wine in a natural style, you have to work with a clinically clean cellar.
100%.
Yeah. So
it's a food production process at the end of the day, which I think wine is. It's also funny. Some winemakers get confused when people want to sell it to her because they're like, "Well, it's just a very clean, should be production facility." But what's interesting? So let's dive into so this is the De Trafford Skin Contact Chenin Blanc. So we've got aromatic, we've got skin contact. So this is also, I suppose, orange wine's also got a marketing problem, because in this last few minutes we've spoken about natural wine, orange wine, skin contact, and orange wine is just the origin of that is basically that one article or something.
Yeah. So basically, so it used to be referred to as an amber wine. So orange wines, and depending on the pH levels and the variety, can have a rainbow of different colors.
Okay.
So if
Clearer
you have, for
into
example,
almost dark.
so if you say, for example, like there's a Pinot Gris, which is known as the grey grape, it's not red, it's not white.
Yeah.
And when you make that, having skin macerated and leaving it on the skin for a while, it actually goes this amazing, like, rose pink color.
Because I've seen the Swartland Pinot Gris, they've got some of the skins are like that pinkish color.
Then it absorbs that color. So if you had to look at Bosman's Fides Grenache Blanc, I mean that is an amber color. Then you can look at other examples of Chenin, which is like a luminous, kind of yellow color, and it's just fun to look at a lot of the time. But it's not necessarily you can say everyone's cup of tea, because I think when you are drinking wine, your palate develops, So back in the day when I went for an interview with my first job, I was drinking like 5-liter box wine. And
don't worry, I was in the same boat.
Yeah, and I think the more I fell in love with it, and the more I started to learn about it, and the more that I tasted, my palate became refined.
Yeah.
And that's when you had to look, for example, it's the first time I'm actually trying the skin macerated Chenin from De Trafford, and it really is delicious.
Beautiful, yeah.
Yeah, and if you had to look at this style of wine, it is made to complement, you can say anything with soy reduction or Asian styles of food. So salty. It goes extremely well with it. They balance it out. I just, you can kind of have like your pork belly, or you can have duck. and like I said, anything with a soy reduction, it really is quite phenomenal. I myself drink many bottles just on their own.
Yeah, I mean, you have to. It's the flagship era. But I must admit, it's really grown on me, this category. I was kind of baiting at the beginning, like, oh, no, it's just oxidized. But it's made in an oxidative way. So there's what we do in the vineyard. Then when we get into the cellar as winemakers, you can go reductive, which a lot of white wines are. So that's almost zero oxygen contact. It retains a lot of, if you think Sauvignon Blanc, you just get a huge, like it's like kind of Woolworths aisle, like gooseberries and like a huge amount of fruits that come through. And that's preserved from the lack of oxygen. But in a way, it's kind of a part of that, it's like a manufactured process because it's cold fermented or cool fermented. Then this is on the other side of the spectrum, and I suppose most wine is somewhere in between, but white wines at least. But this is open top,
exactly like a red wine.
Okay, so you destem.
Yeah, you can have the choice. You can do it whole bunch, but again, it's always the decision of the winemaker. So everyone says I make natural wine. I don't really do much of the wine. Well, you do because you harvest it, and you've got to make that decision. Are we going to destem it? Are we going to put it as whole bunch? Are my stems ripe if I'm going to do whole bunch? So what are the stems?
Because I mean, when you harvest, sometimes you see like green stems. Sometimes they're I think that it's called lignification, when they go like brown and get kind of stalky, like woody. More. What impact does the stem have in a wine like this in terms of flavor?
So through any wine that you're going to be harvesting is that your grape needs to be what they call phenolically ripe, which means that you have to have the pips, which are also going to be ripe inside. And the same is with the stems. And many people don't realize that, because you'll find that if you have a stem which is still very green and you're going to whole bunch press, your wine is going to be green.
Yeah, like biting into an apple after Aquafresh
exactly. I find that there are many people, like there is a producer, for example, in the Swartland that doesn't own a destemmer. So everything he does is whole bunch. And I think, but that again is his style. He likes to have the structure of that because he doesn't own any new oak barrels either. So he's not getting any structure from those maturation vessels.
That's
so
where
he
you get
needs
the
to get
pepperiness and the structure.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. So I can't say if this is obviously whole bunch pressed. For me, it doesn't taste like it. No. It does taste that it has actually been destemmed.
And I mean, look, I know that they've only got a basket press, so there's definitely an oxidative process when it comes to probably pressing it off the skins later once they've done the first. But skin contact. But
you find with this, can you pick up at the flavors on this wine? It's almost like you've got like an orange, like marmalade, like almost coming through, orange peel coming through.
Absolutely.
And whenever do you really find such a citrusy note on a normal Chenin?
I love it. And I also, it's also evolved, because the first time I tasted it was last year, and it had a lot more sort of zing, like almost that tannin effect, on your palate. More savory. I picked up a lot of savory notes, but that's also why it works with Asian food, right? Because it's got the sweetness of fruit, and not it's fruit sweetness, not like sugar sweetness. And then that savory element which comes through. And this is the thing. So we do a lot of training around wine, and you see a wine like this, you're pouring for a guest, and there'd be a red flag. Probably don't serve it because it's probably oxidized. But this is a niche within a niche. So you've got your aromatic and natural wines, but this is skin contact. It's made in a way where you're going to have that skin contact leading to oxidative winemaking process, which also leads to these wines. So it's a really good tip for those waiters and somms in Africa following us. Probably don't have a skin contact Chenin on the list yet, but it's coming.
Yeah, so I think if you... The easiest way that I always say is when I'm describing an orange wine to somebody who's never tasted an orange wine, I always say, you need to taste with an open mind and for example, a Chenin, you have a non-skin contact Chenin and then your skin contact Chenin. Your non-skin contact Chenin is going to show fresh fruit and fresh flowers. The skin contact is usually going to show notes of stewed fruit and potpourri, you know. So it is a wine which is going to come across as maybe slightly more evolved, but it's not actually evolved. It's stylistically made like that.
And it doesn't jump out the glass. You have to almost go in.
You can also actually, it only benefits from air, so even if you want to decant them. But I've always found that people that do ask for an orange, or if you show them an orange wine and you explain to them what an orange wine is before they order it, they generally end up enjoying it. I assisted a friend of mine who opened a restaurant in Johannesburg 6 years ago, and he said, please, can you help me with my wine list? And I said, of course, but then on condition that I do your wine list. There's no, can you put this mates on and that and that.
My cousin in the wine industry.
Created the first list with an orange wine section. And it's incredible how much interest that drew. And I think at a point when before they sold it by now, but I think at a point I was almost all of the small producers in South Africa's biggest client.
I love it, Ange. But that's what I meant by like your passion for the industry is so infectious, and these categories of wine are really important. And we were talking, I was having a conversation with Mike Ratcliffe earlier, and it's all about focus and kind of whittling down. But at the same time, we spoke about that wine is an art, and art, you know, you need those struggling, tortured artists to create that tapestry of wine, which is so interesting and exciting. And these are certainly in that category. They're not going to make a winery a fortune, but it's part of the tapestry and the heritage of wine as a whole. And there's no doubt that the early Cape white wines were made like this.
Exactly like this, yeah.
And what preserved wines back then was sweet wine and skin contact.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
there wasn't
exactly.
like
so it's basically,
it's
and there was also no controlled cooling. You know, so I think all of that changed in probably about the 1980s, early 1980s, when all of that came in. So if you were a producer, and if you then could do temperature control and all that kind of stuff, but before that, then you couldn't. And you can actually see now when you go, everyone is starting to go back to open tank fermenters, to concrete, to clay. So I always say history just repeats itself. Yeah. It's kind of like we're in a hamster wheel. If you want to know what's going to happen in 20 years' time, just, you know, kind of look what happened 20 years ago.
No, absolutely.
You know, so
and nostalgia sells.
I mean, bell-bottoms are due to come back into fashion anytime now.
Just lead the way. So, Andrew, one of the things that I wanted to bring up is also to honor the platform you've created to promote wineries that you are passionate about and these type of wines. So it is, I think it's been my biggest failure in life has been to never attend Noble Vice, and that's mainly because in the early stages of it I was running around Africa, then I had COVID, but I've got no excuse this year.
There we go.
So tell everyone about Noble Vice, and I think, you know, Noble Vice needs to come to Kenya. We should talk about that.
Yeah.
But what is Noble Vice? What is this platform that you've created? Show?
Yeah, so it was 6 years ago. Friends of mine who actually started the Gin and Tonic Festival in South Africa, you know, kind of phoned me and they said, well, you know, the partners that they hosted the Gin and Tonic Festival with want to do a wine show, and they want to make it this really amazing wine show with producers, which not everybody knows. And if anyone can pull those producers in, Angela, it's you.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, of course I'm going to do it. That sounds great. So we started, the first festival was in 2017. We had 25 producers.
At the Biscuit Mill, eh?
Yes, it was at the Biscuit Mill, yeah. And then we started with 25 producers, and I actually went back and reread my my vision and my mission statement that I wrote for myself back then. And it was to invite producers who cannot afford to pay these exorbitant prices, for wine shows. We are also farmers, and about creating a platform to showcase producers that are working respectfully with their land, so that being organic or biodynamic or sustainably, to the best that they can, and also when producing wine in the cellar, to produce that with the least amount of intervention as possible, because, we as a country need to be making wines which are, and showcasing those wines, which are exciting. We need to step out of the realm of mass production, and we were banned from the world. We were, for a while, and unfortunately the caliber of wine that was shipped out at that point wasn't great. So we've been spending 37 years trying to build our reputation again. And so by inviting these producers, they were all small producers, still are small producers, but 6 years ago many of them were unknown. And creating a show where we brought together in with that the top chefs as well, in Cape Town at least, and it was showcasing the art of food and wine next to each other, and then bringing in local musicians as well. So we'd have bands, we still do, and vinyl DJs, and creating a space which is a fun space. It's more of a lifestyle show. And with that, every producer, every winemaker is behind their stand. And so it was really kicked off with a great success in 2017, that by last year I struggled to select 25 producers in 2017. 25, No, and then the following year we increased it to 30. And then last year we realized, we've got so many producers now farming organically and making wines like this, we could actually add an extra day and change over the producers. So last year we hosted it for the first time on Kaapzicht Wine Estate in Stellenbosch. And we do what we call the Noble Originals, is usually on the Saturday. So many of those producers have been with us since day one. And then we change all of them again, and we have a completely new realm of Noble Newbies on the Sunday. Amazing. And that is actually the platform where you'll find many young producers. So I'm talking like sub 30 actually starting with their own brands, launching and showcasing their wines there. So again, it's an invited show. We've got 4 chefs per day. As well, so it's something which sits very close to my heart. I have 3 partners that I work with, and we all have our different responsibilities, but this show for us is an excuse to spend 4 days a year together setting up and plugging in the flowers, and a fully set up show. We do all of the setup ourselves, so it's not like we get a company in or something, so that's why it's just really something really cool. So I select and manage all the wine producers. My other partner, Cameron, does all the look and feel and decor. Stefan does all the online sales and shading, etc. And then Pierre does all the chefs. Amazing. So we've all got our little thing that we do, and it's really just something fun, something we're very proud of, and hopefully something which we one day will manage to do abroad. We do have an idea and have been asked by the producers that actually showcase there if we would ever take it overseas. So it would be lovely for us to be able to do maybe a once-off show in like a New York and a London and something. So that'll be quite fun. But I always find that for the caliber of producers, they keep coming back. So the big thing is that we cap tickets at 500. So it's never a ridiculously full show. You can actually have a conversation. And like I said, it's my little side hustle. It's
awesome, man.
It keeps me in touch with all the producers.
We'll definitely link it up in the video, like a link to it. And I just wanted to say thanks so much for making the time and for sharing your passion. So hopefully those watchers in Africa going into the trade, whether they're coming out of hospitality or or out of auctioneering, they can see that product knowledge and passion is key.
Yeah.
Find your own voice, like have conversations, never burn bridges, and whatever your passion is. I mean, there's no choice. I had no choice but to drink orange wine when you forced me to, and I love it. So cheers to you, Ange, and thank you so much.
Well, thanks to you, and I really appreciate the time here. It's lovely working with you over the many years, and thanks for your support.